Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the franchise discussion category. This video will be dedicated to the recap and thoughts for issue 14 of the Young Justice tie-in comics, Below the Surface. We begin this issue in the Atlantic Ocean on September 4th, where Topo is trying to escape from cloaked figures. Their faces are concealed by the hoods that they're wearing. Topo creates an ink cloud in order to escape the cloaked figures, and he hides in a cave. Unfortunately, though, the cloaked figures are already in the cave, and they're waiting for Topo. The next scene takes us to Mount Justice. It's now September 5th, and the Young Justice team have just returned from their latest mission, which was covered in episode 9 of the TV series, Bereft. Robin, Kid Flash, and Artemis question if Aqualad still needs any help after the events of the latest mission that they were on, but Aqualad assures them that they don't need to be concerned because he's about to head home very soon. So Robin, Kid Flash, and Artemis head back to their respective homes through Zeta Beam technology. Once those three members of the Young Justice team have left, Aqualad extends an invitation to Superboy and Miss Martian to join him on his trip back to Atlantis. Superboy questions why Aqualad would be going back to Atlantis so soon after his previous visit, but Aqualad responds that he would like to visit Atlantis much more often than he has earlier on, or ever since he became Aquaman's apprentice. He also admits that he held off on extending the invitation until after Robin, Kid Flash, and Artemis had left because he knew that Superboy and Miss Martian's respective biologies would allow them to handle underwater pressure. They could endure underwater pressure better compared to Robin, Kid Flash, and Artemis. And he thought it would be much more polite to extend the invitation when those three members of the Young Justice team were no longer present. In any case, Superboy and Miss Martian do accept Aqualad's invitation. So the next scene takes us to Shieres, and it's now September 6th. Aqualad reveals that this city-state of Atlantis is his home. This is where Aqualad grew up. And he also has provided some swimwear and breathing masks for his friends and teammates so that they'll be able to, interact underwater. But Miss Martian says that she won't require those accessories because her Martian abilities allow her to create gills, so she'll be able to breathe underwater. Superboy does take the breathing mask and the swimwear, and so the three members of the Young Justice team head to Aqualad's home, where Aqualad introduces them to his parents, Shalena, his mother, and Calvin Durham, his father. And Miss Martian mentions that she can psychically translate languages, so they'll all be able to understand each other. And Superboy mentions that he learned how to speak Atlantean thanks to the genomes during his time at Cadmus. So while Superboy and Miss Martian are talking to Shalena, Calvin Durham questions Aqualad if he went to the capital of Atlantis, Poseidonus. And Aqualad mentions that Poseidonus is the next stop on his trip. So Calvin Durham tells Aqualad that he should be very careful because there's some kind of trouble going on in Atlantis' capital. So the next scene takes us to Poseidonus, where Aqualad introduces Superboy and Miss Martian to Queen Mira, and Queen Mira says that it's an honor to meet Aqualad's friends and teammates, while Miss Martian says that it's their honor to meet Atlantean royalty. Soon enough, though, they meet Orm, Aquaman's younger brother, and Queen Mira's brother-in-law. And Orm says that he's very protective of his sister-in-law because she's carrying the next heir, the heir to the Atlantis throne. And Aquaman is not in the city right now. Aquaman is taking care of his responsibilities as a member of the Justice League. So Orm tells Aqualad that the arrival of his friends and himself, Aqualad, is a good thing because he brings up what Calvin Durham mentioned to Aqualad earlier, that there's trouble going on in the capital right now. And he says that the Conservatory of Sorcery seems to be where the trouble is most prevalent. So Aqualad, Superboy, and Miss Martian head to the Conservatory of Sorcery. And Aqualad introduces Superboy and Miss Martian to many of his former classmates. They are Lagan, Blubber, Sha'ark, Lori Lemaris, and Ranal. And Miss Martian notices that all of Aqualad's former classmates are quite diverse, or they're a very diverse group. And Aqualad takes this moment to explain a little history about Atlantis. Originally, Atlantis was a continent on the surface, so Atlanteans were originally surface-dwelling humans. But at some point in the past, in the distant past, the very distant past, Atlantis sunk underwater. And because of the continent sinking underwater, the Atlanteans had to use sorcery and science in order to adapt to their new environment underwater. And so that's how the Atlanteans eventually were able to breathe underwater. And as for the various city-states of Atlantis, the citizens of each of these city-states had evolved in different ways. They all went down their own evolutionary path, so to speak. So that explains the diversity of the Atlanteans. And Aqualad mentions that the capital of Atlantis is the most diverse region or location within Atlantis. And soon enough, though, more of Aqualad's friends and classmates arrive. Garth and Tula actually arrive, and Aqualad is quite pleased to introduce his teammates to his closest friends within Atlantis. Miss Martian telepathically tells Superboy that she now understands why Aqualad invited them to join him on his trip to Atlantis, because she's figured out that Garth and Tula are a couple now, and Aqualad couldn't bear to see them alone, so that explains Aqualad wanting to invite them to join him on his trip to Atlantis. Soon enough, though, Aqualad sees Topo, and he wants to introduce Topo to Superboy and Miss Martian, but Topo seems rather nervous and doesn't want to, it seems like he's in a hurry not to be around anyone, and Aqualad soon finds out why. It turns out that Topo, there's some markings that are, Topo's been marked by ancient Atlantean. It's an ancient Atlantean word for impure. And that's where we actually cut to a different scene. We're now at Bar Harbor, and we're at the Windward Retirement Home. Tio Morrow actually visits this retirement home to see Jim Lockhart, And Jim Lockhart says he doesn't recognize Tio Morrow, but Tio Morrow seems to know who Jim Lockhart is. And even though Jim Lockhart doesn't want to be around Tio Morrow, he suddenly finds himself still compelled to listen to Tio Morrow and leave with him to wherever it is that he wants him to go. And Jim Lockhart is quite surprised to see that he doesn't need his walker. So the next scene takes us back to Poseidonus, and Aqualad inquires Tula and Garth about what happened to Topo. And they explain that Topo was attacked by the Atlantean Purists. Those were the cloaked figures we saw at the beginning of the issue. The two explain that the Atlantean Purists are a group of Atlanteans with very prejudiced views. According to the Atlantean Purists, they believe that the Atlantean citizens that look identical to surface-dwelling humans are pure, and in their mind, any Atlantean citizen that doesn't look like a surface-dwelling human, so any visible aquatic features, for example, they view those citizens of Atlantis as impure. And yeah, they've been much more aggressive lately. That's the main thing, because these prejudiced behaviors have existed for a very long time in Atlantis, but for some reason these Atlantean Purists are acting much more, or they've taken a much more aggressive and much more antagonistic approach compared to the past. Soon enough, though, the conversation is interrupted when there's a disagreement, or they hear it looks like a fight's about to start. It seems many of the many of the classmates that Aqualad introduced Superboy Miss Martian to are getting into a fight with Ranal and several other fellow Atlanteans. Ranal and his friends in particular are they're the Atlanteans that look like surface-dwelling humans. So the other classmates of Aqualad, his other former classmates are accusing Ranal and his friends of being the Atlantean Purists, and they believe that Ranal and his friends were the ones responsible for attacking Topo. And Aqualad, Miss Martian, Superboy, Garth, and Tula arrive, and they're able to break up the fight. So, because both sides are accusing the other of starting the fight, and they're like, well, we're ending it, regardless of who started it. So, the next scene takes us to somewhere within the Atlantic Ocean, and we do see that, yes, Ranal and his friends are in fact Atlantean Purists. And they're talking to their leader, who is none other than Ocean Master. Ocean Master, though, says that it was a good thing that Aqualad and his friends broke up the fight, because he says that the Atlantean Purists' greatest weapon is secrecy, and they especially need to keep secrecy on their side because their master plan is about to come into effect. And Ocean Master says they can take action with Aquaman gone, but Aquaman himself is what they would call a pure Atlantean, so surely Aquaman would see the reason behind their methods. So Ocean Master instructs the Atlantean Purists to head off to fulfill their master plan. And once the Atlantean Purists are gone, Ocean Master removes his mask, and we find out that Ocean Master is Orm. The next scene takes us to Queens, where Tio Morrow and Jim Lockhart have arrived in a cemetery, and Tio Morrow has managed to force Jim Lockhart to dig up a grave. Jim Lockhart makes it clear he doesn't want to do this, but for some reason it's as if he's acting not of his free will. Something is compelling him to listen to Tio Morrow. And the grave that's being dug up is of an individual known as Danette Riley. So, yeah, they've dug up the grave of Danette Riley, and she still seems to be, she doesn't seem to be a corpse, or I should say she doesn't look like a decomposing corpse, despite having been buried for decades. So something's definitely suspicious going on. And lastly, the next scene takes us back to Poseidonus, where Queen Mira is sleeping, but the Atlantean Purists attack, and the issue ends with Queen Mira waking up to find Ocean Master has entered the bedroom, and he's threatening her with Neptune's trident. So that's how we end the issue. So there you go. This was part one of the two-part story that actually focuses on Ocean Master, a member of the Light. And I mentioned this before, while I do consider the Young Justice TV series to be a very good TV series, I do think one of its flaws or one of its weaknesses was that some characters feel like they were wasted characters. And Ocean Master, I feel, is an example of this, especially because he's a member of the Light, who are the main villains of the TV series. So it's very notable with Ocean Master. Though it turns out that, according to some behind-the-scenes information, it turns out that the story for this two-parter, the Atlantean Purists conflict, this was apparently meant to be the story for episode 8 of the TV series, but Warner Brothers vetoed the idea for this particular story, probably because of if I had to take a guess, it probably was because of the Atlantean Purists' motives, agenda. That probably was the reason. That's my guess anyway. I'm not sure entirely if that is the case or not. But for whatever reason, Warner Brothers rejected that particular story, but they didn't want it to go to waste, so they ended up incorporating the story into the tie-in comics instead, and had it set after the 9th episode, Bereft. So the 8th episode ended up becoming what we know as Downtime. So that partially explains why Ocean Master didn't get a spotlight episode like the other Light members, and yeah, that didn't help Ocean Master, who drew the short stick when it came to the Light members. I still wish that they could have found a way to give Ocean Master a prevalent role within an episode of the TV series. I still wish they could have found a way to give Ocean Master more to do in the TV series, but I do think it's nice that they were able to at least find a way to give Ocean Master a prevalent story in the form of the tie-in comics, at least. And yes, this issue confirms that Ocean Master is Orm, Aquaman's younger brother, which is the case in the main DC comics as well. But the TV series itself never actually mentioned that detail. Otherwise, the other big detail with this issue was the subplot with Tio Morrow. And yeah, there is definitely something suspicious going on with Jim Lockhart listening to Tio Morrow despite not wanting to do what he's ordering him to do. And Danette Riley, who's been buried for over decades, doesn't look like a decomposing corpse. So yeah, that's answered in the second part 2. So we'll talk more about this story in the the video for part 2. But for now, there we go. As of this video, we've now discussed issue 14 of the Young Justice tie-in comics on this channel. Take care, and until next time.